This weekend is the second to last Sunday in Ordinary Time. Next Sunday, we celebrate Christ the King. And this Sunday, we have the opportunity to speak about, to think about, to meditate upon the last things, or more appropriately, the end times, as we heard in our gospel today. Our gospel today, taken from Mark chapter 13, kind of runs us to the end of where we are as we've been reading through the entire gospel throughout this last year. And we begin year C on the first Sunday of Advent, going into a whole new gospel. But our gospel today, we hear the end of the temple, but we also hear about the end of all time as well. When we hear about the end of the temple, and we only know this because of the context in which our gospel that we heard today, in the context in which it is taken from Mark chapter 13, all the things preceding this are talking specifically about the temple and the destruction of that temple. But we see in our gospel today these two types that signify the end. Yes, the end of the temple is also a signification of the end of all time as well. The temple for the Jews was a microcosm of the entire world, in a sense, the entire universe. The temple itself, the structure itself, will symbolize the earth. There's a big bronze basin outside of the Holy of Holies in the temple courtyard that symbolized the ocean. The Holy of Holies symbolized the heavens as they offered their sacrifice in the Holy of Holies, and the incense went up, and the curtain itself that closed off the Holy of Holies was covered in stars, symbolizing the heavens and the earth, all present in this microcosm of this structure that was built, and not just built because they thought this was the best way to do it, but remember the temple was built with the very instructions from God himself, given to Moses, and then when the new temple was built at the time of Jesus, they followed those same instructions. So the destruction of the temple was not just some small event, but was a sign of a much more cosmic event. When we back up in our gospel, in the Gospel of Mark chapter 13 today, from the first verse until the 8th verse, it talks specifically about the things that are going to take place before the destruction of the temple. And we hear about these tribulations in the first line that we heard, when it said, but in those days after that tribulation. And what's it mean, that tribulation? Well, the tribulation is the time of the destruction of not just the temple, but Jerusalem itself. And so we hear these tribulations in 13 verse 7. It says, when you hear of wars and rumors of wars, do not be alarmed. This must take place, but the end is not yet. For nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. There will be earthquakes in various places. There will be famines. This is but the beginning of the sufferings. We see also after Jesus prophesies about the destruction of the temple and talks about the wars that are going to come, he gives them this command. He says, let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let him who is on the housetop not go down, not enter his house to take anything away. And let him who is afield not turn back to get a coat. And alas, for those who are with child and for those who are nursing in those days, pray that it may not happen in winter. For in those days there will be such tribulation as has not been from the beginning of the creation, which God created until now, and never will be. And so it's talking about this whole time period when the destruction of Jerusalem was going to be so terrible, people needed to leave. And there's a commentator named Josephus about the time that was writing at the time of Jesus, who was talking about the life of the Israelites during that time. And he mentions how no Christians died in the destruction of Jerusalem because they all fled. They all saw the signs of the times, they all saw what was happening, and they all fled. And so no Christian was killed. But what happened to the Jews is that the Romans came in and killed millions of Jews during that time, As the Jews had an uprising around 70 AD, the temple was destroyed, and in order to squash all the uprisings, the Romans came in and just started killing people like crazy. Josephus also talks about how they were crucifying about 500 Jews a day during that time. I mean, it was just utter destruction. But we also see then the language that we did hear in our gospel today about the tribulations. We hear how the sun is darkening, the moon will not give its light, the stars are falling, the powers in the heavens are shaken. Now, all of these are prophetic images. These are images used in prophetic literature to refer to a destruction of a city or the destruction of an empire. We hear similar things in Jeremiah 13 or in Jeremiah 3 or in Isaiah 1. And we even hear it around Daniel chapter 8. We hear about all of these things that are going to happen, these cosmic events, it seems like, that are going to take place. And they all symbolize the destruction of a certain city or a certain empire. So they all they describe the judgment that is going to come upon the people in these places as well. And so kind of prophesies this utter destruction that is going to take place. And so we have this parable from Jesus in our gospel today around verse 8 where he says, the parable about the fig tree. From the fig tree, learn its lesson. As soon as its branch becomes tender and puts forth its leaves, you know that summer is near. So also when you see these things taking place, you know that he is near at the very gates. Truly I say to you, this generation will not pass away before all these things have taken place. So a lot of people look at that and they will say, well, there are groups of people, not a lot of people. There's a group of people who actually will look at this and say, well, none of this actually took place in that generation. The world didn't end in the generation that Jesus was going to say, and so Jesus must not be God because he was wrong about that prediction. But really what Jesus is saying, he's saying, look at the signs of the times, just like a fig tree. We know when a fig tree is going to bear fruit. We know when to pick that. We know when to pick that fruit. So we know the times. So he's been talking about all the things that are going to lead up to the destruction of the temple. And so that's what he's talking about in this time. And in the generation of the apostles and of those first Christians, the temple was destroyed. Jerusalem was destroyed in 70 AD. And so all of these things came true. And so what we see then after that, at the very last line of our gospel to say, but of that day or that hour no one knows, not even the angels in heaven, nor the Son, but only the Father. But then he goes on to tell another parable after that. So he's talking about all of the destruction of the temple, and he says, look at the fig tree, you'll know when it's time. And then he says, but of that day or that hour no one knows, not even the angels. Because right before that he says, heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will not pass away. So now he's kind of changed, and he said, well, what about the end of time? So we have the destruction of the temple, he prophesies that. Now we have the destruction of all of the world, and the end of the world, and he tells another parable. He says, take heed, watch and pray, for you do not know when the time will come. It is like a man going on a journey when he leaves home and puts his servants in charge, each with his work, and commands the doorkeeper to be on the watch. Watch therefore, for you do not know when the master of the house will come, in the evening, or at midnight, or at cockcrow, or in the morning, lest he come suddenly and find you asleep. And what I say to you all, watch. So he's talking about two different events in the entire gospel of Mark chapter 13. The first part of the gospel up until about verse 31, he's talking about the destruction of the temple. And they will know that this is coming because they'll see the signs of all of these things that he is predicting, that there will be wars, there will be rumors of wars. He says to flee, get out of the city, go somewhere where you can be safe. And then the second destruction, or the second part of the end times, is actually the end of all of the world. And that one, he says, we do not know when that time is going to come. But what he does say about it, he says, keep watch, pray, make ready, for you don't know when that time is going to come. And so in all of this, we have the destruction of the model of the microcosm of the world and the destruction of the temple. And so this destruction of the temple is kind of a prefigurement of the destruction of the world and the second coming of Christ in the judgment of all people. But we also have with this prophesying of a tribulation that is going to also come for all of us. There will be destruction, there will be judgment, and it will happen at the end of the world. But it's not something for us to fear. The end of the world is going to come for every single one of us at the moment of our death. At the moment of our death, we will go to be judged by God. And so it's in this life in which we are living that we are constantly keeping watch. We are constantly praying. We are constantly doing our best to live in conformity with God. It's not something for us to fear. It's something for us to prepare for. We don't know when that moment of death is going to come for us. That is ultimately the end of the world for us. Do we know when the actual end of the world is going to be? No. And Jesus says, we don't know. There's lots of people out there who like to try and predict it, but Jesus says, we don't know when that's going to be. But we must keep watch, we must pray, we must live our lives in a manner that is in unity with God. That's our goal. That's what Jesus wants for us, because ultimately he wants us with him. And so that means living a daily prayer life. That means living a faithful, sacramental, regular prayer, sacramental life through confession, through the Eucharist. It means living a devotional life, living a life in the different devotions of the church to help us to grow in our union with God. These things help us to keep watch. These things bring about peace. They dissipate the fear. And it allows us to put our complete trust in God and his plan for us. As we prepare to end this liturgical year and begin a new one, let us come up. Let us enter into that life that God wants for us. The life of union with him, to live for that union with him, to live that sacramental life so that we may always live in union with him and be prepared for that moment when he will call us home, so we don't fear that moment, but we, in a sense, long for that moment that we meet Christ face to face and we are welcomed into eternal life.